During the summer vacations, a group of tourists decided to venture to La Palma, which is part of the Canary Islands archipelago. During the boat trip, Julia realizes that she has lost one of her earrings and starts looking for it while Ida decides to go for a swim. Suddenly, looking down at the floor of the boat, the young woman sees her friend's lifeless body being carried away by the current and despairs. When he realizes that something is wrong, the pilot tries to start the boat to get his crew out, but the water begins to bubble more and the high temperature causes the glass floor to explode. The truth is that since 1949, when the local volcano erupted, the tranquil island of La Palma has been counting down the days is about to explode. Since the incident that year, there have been strong earth tremors on the island and a fissure has appeared along the edge of the volcano. Because of this, there is a risk of a large chunk of the mountain moving towards the ocean, and everything indicates that that part of the archipelago will soon collapse. Even knowing this, a Norwegian family decided to spend Christmas on the island, as they have done for 7 years running. The accommodation is also part of the tradition, and Frederick greets the resort staff before taking the keys to go to his room with his family. After enjoying the beautiful view from the balcony, the couple and their children prepare to go to the beach, and Sarah tells them that she found an earring, which probably belonged to the previous tenant, lying on the floor. That afternoon, Marie and Hauker are in the office monitoring the water temperature gauges on the local beaches. During their daily checks, the pair notice that the equipment has stopped working and decide to go there to check what has happened. To get to the cave where the equipment has been installed, the scientists have to follow a small trail, and, after checking the transmitter, Hauker realizes that there is nothing wrong. The next step, then, is to enter the cave to reach the reader. Halfway through, Marie notices that a new drip has formed on the wall and takes a sample of the water to test later in the laboratory. When he looks down at the ground, Hauker comes across dozens of lifeless bats and decides to check the air quality to make sure they are not exposed to danger. In doing so, the man discovers that the concentration of carbon dioxide is very high, and, although this level does not yet present a danger to humans, he believes that this is what has eliminated the bats. Attentive, the scientists continue their journey and discover that the reader is broken and the device has stopped working. At that moment, Hauker looks up and realizes that the crack in the ceiling of the cave is much larger than it was when they were last there. Concerned, the researchers decide to go and talk to Alvaro, a volcano expert who is advising Marie on her doctoral research. However, when he hears the young woman's theory about the crack she found in the cave, the man tells her that she can't rely on a single piece of information to reach a conclusion that will impact the entire island. If news of a possible volcanic eruption spreads, the entire city will have to be evacuated, so Alvaro advises Marie to forget about it and focus on finishing her doctorate. Even after seeing his friend lectured, Hauker decides to share some information with her and tells her that, 20 years ago, British scientists suggested that a new eruption could cause the entire side of the mountain to fall into the sea. With a piece of land the size of Manhattan sinking into the ocean, a huge tsunami will be caused and thousands of people will lose their lives. Upon hearing this, Marie says that they need to warn the villagers before a tragedy occurs, but Hauker says that this would cause great chaos. According to the scientist, in 2021 Alvaro went public to warn people during an eruption and, as a result, he almost lost his job. If she do this, Marie will put her credibility and her work at risk, which is why her advisor advises her to ignore the data she has collected and continue with her research. That afternoon, Alvaro decides to pay a visit to the coroner's laboratory and discovers that the victims who were on the boat that sank the previous day lost their lives due to burns caused by an extremely hot gas. The doctor says that he found lethal doses of carbon dioxide and sulfur in the victims' lungs, so he asks if there is any possibility that this could be related to the volcano's seismic activity. Faced with this question, Alvaro says that everything is fine, but deep down he begins to worry. After lunch, Frederick and his family are by the pool and Jennifer decides to go for a walk. Soon afterwards, Sarah goes to the beach to play volleyball with the other young people staying at the hotel, and suddenly Frederick realizes that his youngest son has disappeared. Terrified, the man goes out to look for Tobias and enlists the help of Sarah and John to find him. When he finally manages to catch up with the boy, Frederick asks him what he's doing up on that rock and discovers that Tobias was observing the migration of the turtles, which are leaving La Palma. That evening, while her co-workers are having fun, Marie analyzes the water sample she collected from the cave. After analysis, she discovers that there are no minerals in the sample, which indicates that the water didn't take as long as expected to flow down the rock into the cave. Normally, this process takes an average of 30 years to take place and, over this time, the water accumulates the necessary minerals. This suggests that it only took a few days or weeks for the liquid to seep into the mountain, which may indicate that the crack Hauker found goes all the way to the top of the mountain. In an attempt to verify that her theory is true, Marie asks her lab colleague to accompany her to the top of the mountain and, when she gets there, her suspicions are confirmed. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, Anna and the other researchers receive a level 5 earthquake alert, as well as high levels of gas moving to the top of the mountain. At that moment, Alvaro appears and realizes that Marie was right, so he decides to warn the civil guard. While measuring the size of the crack, Marie realizes that the hole is getting bigger and bigger and decides to call her advisor to inform him of her discovery. When he discovers that Marie and Hauker are in the danger zone, Alvaro orders them to leave their equipment behind and get out of there immediately. During their escape, the pair find some people camping on the mountain and inform them that the gas is toxic, so they all flee together. To avoid suffocation, Marie wets some pieces of cloth and orders them to cover their noses and mouths to try and filter out the smoke. While running down the mountain, the woman ends up tripping and fainting as she falls to the ground. A few hours after being rescued, the young woman wakes up in hospital and, as she leaves the room, she runs into her advisor. At that moment, Alvaro informs her that Hauker has also survived and is in hospital, but those people who were camping in the forest ended up losing their lives. After reanalyzing the data collected by Marie and Hauker, Alvaro says that the young woman was right. The worst thing is that the tsunami will affect more than one continent and, if nothing is done, millions of people could lose their lives. For an evacuation to take place, billions of dollars will be needed. In 2004, when Marie was just 10 years old, she lost her parents in a tsunami in Thailand. Of her family, only she and her brother survived, all because there was no alert allowing people to evacuate. After experiencing this traumatic incident that changed her life forever, the young woman knows better than anyone that, when a natural disaster is about to strike, every minute counts. Hearing this sad story, Alvaro decides to put his credibility on the line again and warn people about a possible tsunami to come. So that afternoon, the researcher goes to see the mayor and asks for her help in arranging a meeting with the government, because the lives of all the people on the island are in danger. Worried about the safety of her brother, who also lives on the island, Marie decides to call him and asks Eric to meet her at the institute. When she meets him, the young woman tells him it's time for him to go back to Norway and says she'll buy him a plane ticket. Even after hearing that a tsunami is coming, Eric comes to the conclusion that this is just an excuse from his sister to get rid of him and leaves upset. After arguing with her brother, Marie receives the news that an eruption may be coming and, if this happens, the rift will be open for good. This time, Frederick and his family's end-of-year trip isn't going as expected, as the couple are experiencing a troubled relationship. After secretly witnessing one of her parents' fights, Sarah decides to return home and buys a plane ticket to Madrid. When she arrives at the airport, she calls her uncle and asks to borrow money to buy a ticket from Madrid to Norway, but Jens tries to convince her not to travel alone. Just then, Sarah hangs up the phone and continues on her way, leaving Jens worried. The man then tries to call his sister to let her know what's going on, but Jennifer is distracted and doesn't see the notification on her cell phone. Knowing that a cloud of ash is flying over the island, Alvaro orders Anna to call air traffic control. His aim is to stop all landings and takeoffs because the ash will stop the engines and cause a major tragedy. At that moment, an eruption of volcanic ash takes place and the plane that was on its way to Madrid is unable to cancel takeoff in time. After talking to her brother, Jennifer rushes to tell her husband the news and, while they are in the resort pool, the plane that has taken off crashes, causing a huge explosion. Desperate, the couple decide to go to the local hospital to look for their daughter and Jens is at work when he receives the news about the plane crash. After the incident that claimed the lives of dozens of people, Alvaro informs his team that his family is on a boat leaving La Palma and advises his co-workers to do the same. The researcher is determined to stay on the island to help the authorities in any way he can and orders Marie to take her brother and get out of there, because nobody deserves to go through this kind of tragedy twice. However, when she gets home, the young woman realizes that Eric isn't there and the young man isn't answering his phone. After desperately searching the entire hospital for their daughter, Jennifer and Frederick receive support from a policewoman, who shows them the list of passengers who boarded the plane. Those who survived were taken to hospital and have their names marked, but Sarah is not one of them. At this point, the couple receive the worst news of their lives and discover that their daughter has not survived. Heartbroken, they return to the resort and when they enter the room, they find Sarah and her brother sitting on the sofa next to John. At the sight of the girl, they both have the same reaction and are completely paralyzed, so Sarah gets up to hug her parents and tells them that, a few minutes before takeoff, she had given up on leaving. When she finally hears from Eric, Marie immediately goes to meet him and discovers that the young man is being removed from a bar by the police for causing a fight. In an attempt to get them to release her brother, she ends up assaulting an official and is taken to prison. After receiving confirmation that his niece was not on the plane at the time of the crash, Jens feels relieved and begins to research the availability of boats to take Jennifer and her family off the island. Just then, he calls his sister and reveals that a tsunami alert will be issued shortly. So, before chaos breaks out, Jennifer and her family must go to Tenerife and catch a flight as far away from La Palma as possible. Before hanging up the call, Jens reveals that there is a ferry leaving for Tenerife in 20 minutes and makes his sister promise to catch it. Immediately, the woman and her family rush to their room to pack and, as he can't get a cab, Frederick decides to steal a van to take his family to the departure point. What he didn't expect was to be chased by the owners of the vehicle and, when he parked, the men attacked him. At that moment, Frederick orders his wife to take the children to the ferry and, when he finally manages to run to the port, the boat leaves before the man can get on. During the trip, Sarah manages to get in touch with the girl she met at the resort and advises Charlie to go to Tenerife, as she needs to catch a flight home as soon as possible. That afternoon, while monitoring the eruption rates, Alvaro realizes that his equipment has lost signal and contacts the authorities to inform them of an impending disaster. When the alert is issued, Marie is in prison and her brother is trying to convince the police to release her from her cell so that they can leave the island together. Seeing Frederick alone in the harbor, John helps him onto a boat and, as soon as the pilot starts, everyone sees the volcano erupt. Just then, a woman appears with a baby on her lap, but the pilot doesn't allow her to get on the boat because there's no room for any more passengers. Moved by the mother's desperation, Frederick decides to give up his seat to her and says that he will find another way off the island. Meanwhile, Alvaro is in his living room drinking a bottle of wine while waiting to be shot. Suddenly, Hauker appears and informs him that he has just left the hospital. Alvaro updates him on what's going on and tells the researcher to take a boat to Tenerife. However, instead of doing this, Hauker grabs a glass to accompany his friend, as he knows there aren't enough boats on La Palma for everyone to leave the island. During the conversation, the pair decide that they are going to set off in a memorable way and make one last field trip to the volcano. Seeing all those people running desperately through the streets, Frederick comes to the same conclusion as Hauker and decides to accept his fate. The man then sits down on the sidewalk next to the police station and calls his wife to say goodbye. After apologizing for the arguments they had been having lately, Frederick asks Jennifer to take good care of the children and then the signal is interrupted. When he discovers that his brother-in-law is still on the island, Jens contacts Hugo Berg and asks for his help in finding the safest places on the island for people to take shelter. At the police station, she discovers that the town is already being affected by the lava and runs away to try to catch a boat. When Andrea leaves, Eric takes the keys and runs to the cell to free his sister. On leaving the police station, the pair run into Frederick and the man informs them that all the boats have left. At this point, Eric says that he usually uses a boat for his dives and asks Marie and Frederick to follow him. When he arrives at the beach, he picks up the key that was hidden in the sand, but just as he is about to get into the boat, an armed man appears and tries to steal it. In an attempt to ensure that his sister makes it to Tenerife, Eric attacks him and ends up being shot. That afternoon, Marie sees her brother losing his life in her arms without being able to do anything to save him. When he sees the lifeless young man on the sand, Frederick becomes enraged and attacks the man who shot him. During the duel, the man tries to drown him, but Frederick finds a rock at the bottom of the sea and uses it to strike his enemy. After getting rid of his opponent, the man takes the gun and drags Marie into the boat while trying to keep the other people who are approaching away from the vessel. According to Hugo's calculations, there is one point in Tenerife that will not be affected by the tsunami, and that is exactly where the waves meet before continuing to spread. The people standing at that exact spot will be protected from the gases released by the volcano and the tsunami, which will sweep away everything in its path. After discovering that there is a way out of the disaster that is about to happen, Jens rushes to tell his boss the news, but Petra refuses to share the information because she doesn't want to take the blame if thousands of people lose their lives following her advice. Luckily, Jennifer and her children manage to catch a flight out of the archipelago and, with only 10 minutes to go before takeoff, Sarah receives a message from Charlie saying that he is at the airport. The girl then asks her mother and brother to get on the plane and leaves to find her friend with the promise that she will board before the plane takes off. However, when the girls finally meet, Charlie hugs Sarah and tells her that she has to say goodbye because she hasn't got a boarding pass. Luckily, the girl has kept the bracelet that was supposed to belong to her father, but knowing that Frederick won't arrive in time, Sarah decides to save her friend. After putting on their protective suits against the heat, Alvaro and Hauker climb to the top of the mountain closest to the volcano and take their last sips of wine before the whole mountain collapses. At that moment, Marie and Frederick have just arrived in Tenerife and feel the impact caused by the collapse of the mountains. Looking through her binoculars, the scientist realizes that the wave has already formed and is on its way to the island. In less than 20 minutes Tenerife will be hit, so Jennifer decides to go out and look for her daughter, as she is taking too long to get back to the plane. When he discovers that the mountain has just slid and fallen into the ocean, Jens decides to risk his entire reputation and his job to make a live broadcast warning people in Tenerife that there is a safe place where they can take shelter. After sharing the exact coordinates of the neutral point, where the waves will not reach, the man is removed from the rostrum by a security guard. While he's trying to pull himself together, Frederick receives a message on his cell phone with the location of where he needs to go. When he comes across those coordinates, his hope is renewed and he shares the information with Marie. Then they both return to the boat, as they need to go around the island to get to safety. Shortly before takeoff, Sarah and Charlie get on the plane and the girl starts looking for her mother, but realizes that Jennifer and Tobias are not on the aircraft. Worried, Sarah calls her mother and finds out that she is not on the plane. Knowing that her relatives won't be able to board before takeoff, the girl shares the location of the safe point with her mother. With Tobias' help, Jennifer unravels the coordinates and gets a ride to the location. Minutes later, when the tsunami hits the city, the pilot receives permission to take off, but is unable to take off due to a crack in the middle of the runway. As the aircraft can no longer move, it ends up being hit by the gigantic wave and Sarah is submerged along with the other passengers. At that moment, Marie and Frederick are racing against time to reach the site before they are overtaken by the gigantic wave that is approaching at high speed. Just as they were about to be hit, the boat arrives at the indicated location and the pair enter a crevasse created on the edge of the island. Relieved, Frederick and Marie see the two ends of the wave coming together behind them and make it safely to the beach. When they get there, they meet the few survivors who managed to get to the site in time, and only then does Marie have time to process her loss. At this point, Frederick also begins to wonder what happened to his family, as he doesn't know if they managed to take off in time. Suddenly, the man hears his son's voice calling him and immediately gets up to hug him. Just then Jennifer appears and runs into her husband's arms. Seeing his wife and son, Frederick asks where Sarah is and has no idea that the young woman has just suffered a tragic accident. With the impact of the waves hitting the plane, most of the passengers were knocked out, but Sarah managed to survive. Seeing Charlie unconscious, the young woman despairs and does her best to revive her. At that moment, the stewardess approaches and starts giving the girl a heart massage, as she believes she has drowned. With the woman's help, Sarah manages to bring her friend back and, as they leave the aircraft, they both come across the wreckage of the city left by the tsunami. Minutes later, the pair are found by rescue helicopters and taken to safety, where all the survivors are being gathered. As soon as she lands on the beach, Sarah sees her family and runs to hug them, relieved to see them all well. Despite losing the only member of her family in yet another natural disaster, Marie is happy to see Frederick's family reunited and fondly remembers the good times she had with Eric over the past few years. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more series recaps. See you next time.